All right, well, good morning. My name is Freya Liggett, and I'm the Curator of History here at the Northwest Museum of Arts and Culture. And we are standing in the exhibition Bomber Boys. And today you're going to explore with the curator, Stephanie Lile. And I'll have Stephanie introduce herself and share where you're calling from today.
Well, hi, everybody. I'm Stephanie. I'm over in Gig Harbor, Washington, on the west side of the state, where this collection was actually found in the hayloft of a horse barn. So it's really nice to be able to share this exhibit with everyone on the east side of the state and to say hello to everybody today.
Great. So I think what might be fun today is to start with that collection that you just mentioned and give people an idea of what that looks like. And we'll head over to that first case.
So,
yeah, sorry, you mentioned that this was found in a hayloft, and can you give us a little background on the story of this discovery?
Sure. So, like many people that served in World War II, my dad never really talked about his experiences over there. He was very much a forward thinker and optimist, and he's like, that's in the past and it's over. But after he passed away kind of suddenly from a heart attack in 1993, about 3 years later, we were doing a big hayloft clean out of the house that my folks had lived in for about 25 years and came across these boxes that had been stowed away up in the hayloft. And we were hauling things to the burn pile in the pasture. And but we knew from long years of experience with my dad that you don't just throw a box into the fire. You got to go through it piece by piece. And the treasures are mixed in with, crazy stuff. So we actually found these two boxes of photographs. And the red diary that is in the center of that case is from 1945. And we recognized my dad's handwriting and notes that he had taken about different missions that he was on, and thought, well, that's really amazing and kind of bizarre. And then the more we dug, it was literally just this box packed with curled old dusty photographs and old mouse chewed letters. And, the more I looked at it, the more that, man, we've got to save this. There's a story here. I'm not sure what it is yet, but I'm going to try to piece it together, because all we had was, the knowledge that he had served in Italy and that he was a tail gunner. And that's really all he ever said. There was a pilot friend of his from Moses Lake that would come and visit once in a while. And they would sit on the porch of the house and talk about old war days, but would never really invite anyone else to be part of that conversation. And so I think that putting this exhibit together was a really important process for me to really understand what he went through and where he was and what he did and, what they were actually trying to accomplish. And through that process, building a timeline, figuring out the context of every piece in the collection was really an interesting process to understand this microcosm of World War II that was, in fact, the 57th Bomb Wing, it was actually the 12th Army Air Force and the 57th Bomb Wing, the 321st Bomb Group, and the 445th Bomb Squadron, which is complex, but how the division was set up. And it took a while. And I learned all that literally from a little scrap of paper that was in that collection in my dad's handwriting that noted what those divisions were. So that helped me create a framework for the exhibit.
So most of the objects outside of the case in this exhibit are portraits, correct?
Correct.
Yeah, and can you tell me a little bit about the background of those? And as you're uncovering your father's story, what's the aspect of these portraits that starts to emerge through your investigation?
Well, it was really interesting to begin to get a sense of like what really stands out in this collection. It's one thing to build a timeline, to figure out where someone was when, to give context to the diary, but there's all these fantastic portraits in this in this particular collection. And it just got me wondering, like, well, who are these people and what are their stories? And at the time I was teaching at University of Washington, Tacoma. So I have to give a lot of credit to some of the students that were in my Methods of Museum Interpretation class, because what we did is when we had a name of a person, we were able then to delve in a little bit deeper and create short biographies of all of these different men, and then be able to actually write the labels and identify them. So all of these are semi-candid portraits. Some of them are actually done by news people that went over to the front. And a lot of these were publicity shots, like the one at the very front, that's my dad looking out of the tail gunner position. Some of them are playful shots, like Phil on the propeller. But it's just interesting to look at these sort of candid portraits. And that was really something about the collection that stood out for us, was like, wow, who are all these people? What is their story? And these portraits, well, the quality of the photograph may not be spectacular. The content of the photo is really great. And it's been a process of trying to research and find families associated with a lot of these folks. The guy holding the propeller on the left-hand side of the screen is Reed Nels, and he's the fellow from Moses Lake that was a pilot that actually used to come to visit my dad. And I was able to confirm the identity on that photograph by getting in touch with his daughter via Facebook. So, and I've had other people emerge since then that have been doing research on their fathers and trying to figure out fathers, grandfathers, uncles, figure out where they were when, and be able to identify some of the people that were in that show. So it's been an incredible process.
So, in addition to these portraits, I think it's kind of interesting to note what they were doing with the photography itself. So maybe if we turn over here to look a little bit about the combat aspect of the B-25s and what was happening within that crew. And can you talk a little bit about where the portraiture fits into what was happening with that combat crew?
Well, sure. I think that, when you look at some of these photographs, and we don't have that many photos of active combat, and that's why that one particular shot that's on the top of, there's the crew on the bottom, and then the waist gunner shot at the top. And it's pretty rare to find one from inside the plane. And that is actually my dad at the waist gunner position. Even though he was a tail gunner, it was a similar type of gun. So this is a pretty unusual shot. It probably was during training, but I'm not 100% sure. And so that was one that we felt was important to show, because you have to understand why these people were there. There were people that went to training camp to be pilots or navigators or bombardiers. And the phrase that was given to me by a woman who was one of the trainers in Florida at the training camp was, if headquarters called and said, we need gunners, we send them gunners. And so if you're a certain size and weight, and my dad was a pretty small guy, so he could fit in the tail gunner slot. So they used to say, go up a gunner, come down a gunner. And so it was pretty terrifying to get put in that gunner position. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just saying, you mentioned the go up a gunner and come down a gunner, which, you look at the number of missions that these men flew. I mean, I'm just looking here at this one particular image that has all of the stamps of these mice denoting their different missions. Can you talk a little bit about that for us too?
Yeah, that's a really great photograph. That actually is the 100th mission of a plane called Shithouse Mouse. And the crew, both the flight crew and ground crew, are pictured in this particular portrait. And it was a pretty famous plane, but especially when you consider that they were manufacturing B-25s with an expected mission cap at about 11 missions. So they figured they were going to lose a lot of planes. And when a plane could make it to 100 missions, that was pretty spectacular. My dad flew 59 missions. There were other people that flew in the 60s and 70s, depending on their roles and positions. And so originally in the war, 25 missions was a tour. And that is the the classic Catch-22, the novel by Joseph Heller, who was also in the 57th Bomb Wing, that was written about the 12th Army Air Force and or Air Corps, excuse me, and they were stationed predominantly on Corsica and then later in northern Italy. And so when they actually started upping the mission counts, that was the ultimate Catch-22, because you had to fly if you were sane, but if you were insane, that was the only reason why you would fly. So that scene in Catch-22 is a true classic. And I guess when you look at the portrait of Glenn Byerly there on the right, where you see that shot up tail of a B-25, you realize the tail gunner is sitting right in between that part of the tail and the other side that's like a mirror image. And to get shot up that bad and be able to land safely was pretty miraculous.
Absolutely. One of the aspects of the exhibition that unfortunately we weren't able to I think participate with was the game of fate, just being with the different COVID restrictions. So we captured some of the follow-up on the stories through just a looping video, whereas the exhibition had originally had it where you picked up a card and you followed a bomber boy through the course of the exhibit, and then came over here to the mail slot to find out what had happened and pull a letter out, discover the fate of your bomber boy. Could you talk a little bit about sort of that game of fate and game of chance? I think you just talked about the statistical probability of how long a plane or a crew might survive.
Yeah, I think one of the most impactful moments in the process of putting together this exhibit was coming across a list of names in the back of my dad's diary. And I posted those names on the 57th Bomb Wing kind of forum or chat site and asked about these people. And it came back, oh, that was the plane that got shot down. Well, that was only part of the story. And it began to make me think about what was the fate of all of these different men. And that was one of the things that the students in the class, when they were developing these research biographies, was to figure out what happened to them. And then we made a series of cards that gave you a sense of, what, here's your guy that you're going to find in the exhibit. And you can find out a little bit more from the image label, and then you can find out ultimately what happened to them in the war or after the war at the mailbox. And the mailbox is based on that portrait that's on the right of Captain Webb. And he's picking up the mail on base. And so we based the mailbox slots on that photograph. And the idea here was also to convey how tenuous it was for the air crews to go up. I mean, being in flight combat in World War II was a pretty new thing. And in most cases, enlisted men had to be single in order to be able to fly because there was such a high risk of them not coming back. And there's a story about two men that were in this squadron that were their names were in the back of my dad's diary that talks about a plane that was shot down. And what happened was most of the crew actually survived. They were able to bail out when they realized their plane was going to crash. And four of them, well, so it's a long story and I'm not going to go into great detail, but basically the story is that two of them were killed by the Germans. One of them survived to get back to camp to report the whole thing. And all of them, their names were actually in the back of my dad's diary, and he was noting whether people had made it or not. And probably one of the most telling things is that a young boy who saw this all happen in Italy, later in life as an adult, created a monument to the two men that were shot by the Germans on the side of the road by his village. So, and that was all part of the risk that you took when you chose to fly in the Air Corps.
Well, I think that's interesting, where you talk about the, I guess, sort of the ongoing legacy of these stories and how they're still unfolding. I mean, you're talking to folks, on Facebook and different chat sites. And I think if we kind of go a little bit further into the exhibit here, there's some more of these candid photographs. And I know you've got some great stories about not just the airmen, but also some of the people that they interacted with while they were on the base here. I don't know if you want to pick one of these to tell us a little bit about kind of the community that they were part of.
Well, as I said, they were both ground crew and air crew. And there's a fellow named Fred Lawrence who, when I wrote the novel Tail Gunner, which was based on this collection, I didn't know who some of these people were. And he became the model for this character named Stu Boy. And Fred Lawrence actually wrote this great book that helped me learn a lot about the difference between, what ground crews were doing and what air crews were doing. And he actually, I had an opportunity to talk to some of these folks, and he mentioned that the ground crews got to the point where they didn't even want to know the air crew because it was too high of a risk that they would not come back. So they didn't want to develop great friendships with the air crew because it was just too difficult. And so I think that is very telling. But it's also interesting sort of look at their relationships with some of the local people, like what we call the ping pong boys down there in that bottom picture. There's, there were a lot of friendships that were developed between American soldiers and either Corsican boys and children, and then also, some of the guys talk about the Italian women that did laundry for them and whatnot. And so I think it's just really interesting to sort of look at some of these images and realize that there were some great relationships there. And I think probably for me, one of the most surprising aspects of it, when I was conversing with someone from Italy who was also a scholar of World War II there in Italy, and I just felt so terrible that my father had basically bombed his village. And he's like, oh, no, wait a minute. They were the liberators. They were actually helping us. And I thought, wow, that is not the twist that I expected. And so it's the more you dig, the more you learn. And I think the more our minds open in terms of our relationships with different people. And, I think that there was a lot of downtime. World War II for the Air Corps was like, you're in a plane and you're on mission and it's go, go, go. And then all the rest of the time it's stand down on mission and you're waiting around to see what's going to happen. So we wanted to create this bunk set and we used photographs like the one you see there in the top left of the screen to give a feel of here's the basic setup that people had. And this was the nice version, right? But they wouldn't have a lot of stuff. They might have a couple books from home. They might have an extra pair of pants and a t-shirt, a flight vest and a flight jacket. So it was not particularly fancy, but it was very functional. And this is really modeled after photographs like the one you see in the screen there. In the left-hand part of the screen, to give us a sense of what did these bunks look like? And we actually found some tiny little photographs that helped us kind of develop this whole look and feel and put the pieces together. Even though they're all World War II era, they are not necessarily part of Lile's collection. And I love Towel Guy. I mean, it's here he is, he's coming out of the shower and somebody snaps his picture. It's that's cool, right?
Unexpected.
Yeah, exactly. And Lorton, the guy that's sitting there on the steps, turns out after some research, they discovered that he was an awesome baseball player and he actually was the one that carried the team for their squadron. So Lorton, I love that they would sign some of these photographs, and in many cases, they would have these pictures taken, they'd sign them, they'd send them home. And in some cases, this was the last image a family had of their loved one. And it's just really remarkable. Some of them, we still don't know who they are. I did finally hear from the family of the guy in the top photo in the middle, who I always called poser guy. And he is, uh, his nickname was Mac. And so it was cool to hear from the family to discover his identity, because other people, like the two gentlemen in the middle photo, I still don't know who they are. I have some maybe ideas, and there were some names and addresses written in the back of my dad's diary, but I have not been able to connect with those folks. So they may not still be with us. But and other clues were given to us by people actually signing those photographs. So the one on the right, Charlie Smith, we can identify because he had actually signed that photograph. It got cut off in the reproduction, but on the original photograph, it has his signature on it. So it's fun to see all these little details that you don't think about when you give a photograph to somebody, and we don't do that very much anymore. But a hand signed photograph from World War II is a great treasure, because it tells us something about who they were and who their friends were and all of that. So.
I think I'm going to ask you a question about maybe kind of a post exhibit question. Well, I guess, we're looking at the wall right now that kind of sums up sort of the fate of these different men, and I believe this is sort of a celebratory image, marking the end of the war. Is that correct?
That is, yeah.
Okay. What
Yeah.
Do you have a favorite, post or down the road story, like somebody that you found maybe through the exhibit being hosted at another location, and that you, like you said, that there were people who recognized some of their relatives? Is there a favorite story that you can share in that kind of vein?
Well, I think one of the things that is really fun that I learned, and about this particular portrait, what it was found by accident, kind of, because there in this collection there are also a number of photographs, or excuse me, a number of envelopes that had people's names written on them in my dad's handwriting. And this was in one of those envelopes of negatives, and it was not a picture that had been printed anywhere else that I could find in the entire collection. And I think that so I went and had these negative scans so that I could actually see what the images were more clearly and whatnot, and to really understand the significance of this particular photograph. This is basically May 8th, 1945. And when I dug into this story a bit deeper, they said this is the day that they gave away the bar. So you'll notice that everybody's got a bottle of champagne. They're all celebrating. They're just like passing out bottles, and everybody's just having a great time. And that guy that we talked about earlier, Mac, is the poser guy, is the guy who's right there in the center of the photograph. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And you can see that big smile, and they're all thrilled to be alive, right? And after the war, I mean, the war did continue on, and some of these fellows went on to fight in the Pacific. Some of them went home. In the case of my dad, he had to stay there and help clean up the camp and shut down the POW camp. And so there's some reference to that. But I think that when we really look at the accomplishments, what these guys were doing was absolutely critical to the end of the war. They were doing strategic bombing on the rail pass between northern Italy and Austria and Germany. And the whole idea was to cut the supply line between where their supplies were coming from up into Austria and Germany, so that they could actually choke out the Hitler's army. And they were very effective at bombing rail bridges, rail lines, critical marshalling yards, radio towers. So that's really what they were doing in order to really cut that supply line at Brenner Pass. It was called Operation Bingo. And I think when they were victorious and the war ended, they were all ready to celebrate. But it was a bittersweet victory, right? There's a notation in my dad's diary that is mentions Mussolini shot and hung today. Good deal. The war is almost over. And you realize that when someone gets to that place where they're celebrating the death of a major leader, whether you're a Mussolini fan or not, there's a sort of cynicism of war that has permeated those entries. And I think that these people were just so ready to move on and not have to fight anymore that, VE Day couldn't come soon enough.
We have our complimentary story here in the back case, Stephanie. I don't know if we've shared much about that with you.
Yeah.
And maybe just for your benefit, we can kind of go over there and take a look at it.
Yeah. Okay.
This is our local bomber boy story, and this is about Bombardier James Wesley Crowe. And his crew was basically shot down behind enemy lines and spent 9 days, basically trying to get to a place where they could be rescued and flown out. He had written about it in his journal, and we worked with cartoonists to kind of bring that story to life through these panels.
Nice. It looks great.
It just really speaks, I think, to the scale of these types of stories. Where, almost any time, during the course of this and the other World War II exhibition, anytime you touched an artifact, you almost couldn't help but find, another story of this scale. And I'm imagining that that's pretty much the same experiences as you had going through your father's collection, and then beginning to explore, well, and who's this, and who's this next associated with him.
Yeah, I think figuring out the timing of training, the amount of training that these guys went through, and then when they actually shipped out, where they shipped out from. I did have a wonderful conversation with Norm Doe, who was one of the pilots in that particular squadron, and was a friend of my father's. And so I had a chat with him before he passed, which was great. And he explained to me why it took them so long to get to North Africa, which is where they typically would land and then get assigned to a squadron and moved on to base. And they had to dodge U-boats all the way across the Atlantic. And so they went all over crazy routes to make sure that they could avoid the U-boats when they were on these big magic carpet ships that would take troops over to North Africa. And there is something behind you that I thought might be a fun mystery to explore. And maybe someone in your audience will know the secret answer to this. We don't know yet. You can see that big Mickey Mouse painting. And Mickey Mouse, of course, was a major icon in American cartoons at the time. And that particular painting is actually it's an artist's reproduction of an image that appears in the portrait to the right-hand side of that wooden door. So if you look closely at that, there is a sign there that says the 8th Ball Squadron Day Room, and it has that Mickey Mouse symbol on it. And the more, I researched trying to figure out where exactly this was. And I know that these folks trained in South Carolina, but I still have never found out where exactly this scene, this particular set of portraits was taken. But we did have this big sign made, because the more we looked at that symbol showing Mickey Mouse behind the 8-ball chained to it with the machine gun, it's like, wow, that is so packed with American iconography that it's just an incredible story. And on one hand, it's sort of, we are obligated to protect and serve with our allies. On the other hand, it feels like, what is Mickey doing there? He's like this little nice guy, and the 8-ball is sort of like, you can't win no matter which way you turn it, and you're chained to it. So you have the chance of losing everything with losing that 8 ball. So I think there's just a lot of really interesting messaging that's happening with that symbol. And as I've said, we don't know exactly where those photographs were taken, where that symbol appeared. And Disney did a lot of symbols and artwork, and I know students that have actually taken entire classes on this, but we have shared this image around and still no one has been able to tell us where that was. So if anybody out there knows, we would love to learn more.
Well, that would be a great outcome, I think, to close out Bomber Boy's stay here at the Northwest Museum. And yeah, that would be fantastic. Can you tell us a little bit about what you have planned for Bomber Boys once it has left Spokane, and it is what happens next?
Well, it gets packed up and put in my garage, which is probably not what you want to include. Well, I have been trying to find another venue for it. Our goal with this exhibit was really to make it available through 2021, which, is the 75th anniversary of the end of World War II. And I feel great that we've accomplished that. This exhibit could easily go to other venues, and for those that are interested, it's been in Denver, it's been in Mesa, Arizona, it's been in Spokane. So it's been a variety of places, which is fantastic, and I'd love to see it continue on. But if it can't, at least we've told this story, and we have created the draft. I've got a proof copy that travels with the exhibit of a book that basically compiles all of these portraits and the stories of the men that are depicted in them. So maybe someday soon we'll publish that book, and then that can live on beyond the life of the exhibit.
Great. And maybe on your closing thoughts, you could tell us just a little bit more. You'd mentioned it before, but talk about your own book that's based on this story, mm-hmm. and just share a little bit about that with us.
Yeah. Well, at the time that I was working with this collection, I was also in a Master's of Creative Writing program, and we have to do a thesis project for a publishable novel as part of the final project for that master's program. And I thought, when am I ever going to have the opportunity to do this and have the great guidance that I had through that program? And so, because I just didn't know a lot of the stories of these people, this was before we had actually begun to do some of the biographical research. I dug as much as I could, but I really was having a hard time finding any information out. And so I crafted this story that is basically built on the idea of the power of objects, and that sometimes when we as individual humans hold something in our hand, we have this incredible connection to it, and sometimes we don't even know why. And so the main character of that book has this ability to basically read the memories of the spirits of the men that come out of the photograph to meet her and hang out with her. There's like 5 guys that kind of get her to help them with their final mission, kind of the whole plot of the book. And she discovers that she can read their memories when she and the individual are holding the same photograph. And so the photographs that are sparked by that memory, she is able to actually read them from that individual, because in many cases, the guys couldn't even talk about what happened and why that photograph was meaningful to them, because it might be someone that they flew with that died, and it was a horrible accident or something. You just don't know. And so she was able to tap those memories and help them fulfill a final mission that really brought peace to a lot of the guys that were on a particular crew, what they called Missions 17. And so I think that it's a young adult novel. It's not what most people expect when they pick up this book called The Tail Gunner. They're kind of expecting the story of this guy who was a tail gunner in World War II, which is part of the story, but it's also about bridging that gap between what we know of World War II and what we think about World War II in modern day, and really beginning to understand some of the firsthand experiences and the emotional experiences that many of these men witnessed in a time when you came back from war, there was no counseling for PTSD. There was none of that. It was like, look forward, move on, get a family, and get a life. And so there's a lot that was held inside that she was able to reveal through connecting with them with these photographs. So that's kind of the basics of the Tail Gunner. Yeah.
Well, thank you. I love how you've explored this story through two, well, seemingly different but very similar, I think, crafts. Both with your writing and with your curation for Bomber Boys here. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you. It's been an honor to have the show at Northwest Mac. So thank you so much for believing in it and wanting to share it with your audiences. Yeah.
Great.